Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to our Tanya class. We're in the middle of chapter 23 on page 95, on the top, towards the top of the right column, as for the thought and meditation. Up to this point, Alter Rebbe discussed, quoted in the beginning of the chapter, two statements. One from the Zohar, that the Torah and God is all one, literally one. And in the commentary on the Zohar, which says another statement that the 248 positive commandments are the 248 limbs of God. In other words, he compares the mitzvahs to a limb, to the organ of Hashem, whereas the Torah, he says, is Hashem himself. The point over here is that Torah and mitzvahs are unified with Hashem in a very, very perfect unity. But there's a difference between Torah and that of mitzvahs. The unity of mitzvahs with Hashem is like an organ to the soul, like a body and a soul. Your soul and your body are very much unified, right? They become one, really. But they're not the same. The soul is the soul and the body is the body. They're completely and utterly unified with each other to the point where the body responds to the soul's desires immediately without thinking, without any commands. The body and soul become one in that way, very much unified. But the soul is the soul and the body is it's two things that became unified. Whereas the Torah is God himself. It's not two things. It's one and the same. Hashem and the Torah is one essence. So now when a Yid does a mitzvah, he's like at that moment his hand, the power of the soul that's doing the mitzvah with the faculties of action that are doing the mitzvah, are like an organ to Hashem. Is also unified with Hashem in an unbelievable unity, in a real oneness, like that of the body and the soul. Whereas the physical limb, in other words, I want to make the distinction. When let's say a woman lights the Shabbos candles, she strikes a match, puts it onto the candle, makes with her hands, makes the blessing with her mouth and covers her eyes and does the mitzvah of lighting Shabbos candles. Or a male that lays tefillin in the morning with his hands. So there are three things that are happening here. There's the hand, the physical arm of the human being that's engaged in the mitzvah. There's the power of the soul that is animating that mitzvah, that's animating the arm which is doing the mitzvah, the power of soul, the soul power of action. And then there's the performance itself. So he says the performance and the soul powers are God's organ. They are unified with Hashem like an organ to a soul. They didn't become one and the same, but they're very unified, completely one with Hashem. Whereas the actual physical arm is like a vehicle, we said. If you remember, we talked about that last time. There's a vehicle. What's a vehicle? You have a car, right? You all came here tonight with a car, and you got into your car 20 minutes ago to get you here. You didn't have a conversation with your steering wheel. Should I go right? Should I go left? You turned it, and it went. A vehicle doesn't have a will of its own. You don't have to convince it to do what you want. However, the vehicle, you do have to give it a command. It's not like an organ. An organ is reflexive. The instant the soul wants something, the organ is moving. And the vehicle is not that way. A vehicle, you have to actually say a command. Or you have to turn the wheel. You have to do something. The vehicle is not going to work. Just because you want it in your mind, the car is not going to stop moving. You have to actually press the gas and turn the ignition and turn the wheel. That's a vehicle. It doesn't become literally unified like an organ to a soul. The hand that does the mitzvah is like God's vehicle. The power of action and the soul that's animating the hand, it becomes like God's organ. But then there's an even greater unity. That is when a Yid learns Torah. When a Jew learns Torah, he is not like an organ to a soul, or a body to the soul. He becomes literally, that is God himself. He becomes one with Hashem. It's not two entities that became very unified. It's one entity. And that's what we're going to learn today. You follow? Mm-hmm. As for the thought and meditation in the words of the Torah, let me read this slow so we understand this. As for the thought and meditation in the words of the Torah that are in the brain and the power of speech engaged in the words of the Torah that is in the mouth, so you have the thought when you're thinking a concept in Torah, and then when you're learning with your mouth, you're saying the words of the Torah. So there are two things. There's the thought and meditation that are in the brain, and the power of speech that is in the mouth. These being the innermost garments of the divine soul. Before we talked about the power of action, which is a more external garment for the soul. External power of the soul. Thought and speech are much more internal. They're the most these being the innermost garments of the divine soul, not to mention the divine soul itself, which is clothed in them. That means the soul itself, which is engaged in meditation in Torah matters, or speaking Torah matters. There's the mouth, the power of speech. There's the mouth, the power of speech, and the soul that is animating that power of speech. Just like in the mitzvah, you have the arm, the power of action, and the soul that's animating it all. The same thing in learning Torah. You have the physical brain and the physical mouth. Then you have the power of speech and the power of thought. Then you have the soul that is engaged in all of that. There's the soul's power of thought, and then there's the soul itself that is involved in that thought. So she says like this, all of them are completely merged in perfect unity with the Supreme Will, and are not merely a vehicle. You understand? The mouth itself is a vehicle. That's the physical part of your body. But the power of speech and the power of thought that's engaged in this meditation and thought and words, speaking words of Torah, and of course the soul itself, they become one and the same with Hashem. Not just like a vehicle, and not even just like an organ to a soul. They become one. They're one and the same. And he explains why. It's very different than mitzvahs. You understand the distinction here. The mitzvahs was saying you become like an organ to the soul. Where over here you become the Hashem himself.
But it has to include the meditation as well. So just the thought or reading does not.
Thought is meditation. What is thought?
No, I'm saying, but just reading. If you're
not understanding.
Yeah. You're not understanding
First of all, it depends. It's an interesting law. When you read the written Torah and you don't understand it, that's called learning Torah. Not so with the oral Torah. The oral Torah needs to be understood. For example, a person says Tehillim. Most people don't understand what they're saying. A lot of people, they just read it. They don't really understand it, but the soul is connected to it.
I was going to say, I mean, your soul knows what
okay,
you're
so
saying.
that's the point.
I mean, this part of here, how do we differentiate our one, ourselves, our oneness that understands 100% what it's saying, whatever you're reading, whatever you're studying, but this part of me here does not. You understand what I'm saying? What the difference would be?
Your soul understanding and your
my soul
conscious mind
understands it
doesn't.
because if I'm
But
one, of course
she's
I do.
asking, no, she's asking, obviously you need the conscious, if you're talking about the power of thought, she's saying that you would think that you need the consciousness of the mind to understand what it's learning. Sure, when you learn Torah, you should understand what you're saying. And I agree with you.
Okay.
But even if not, there's a certain element of this, nonetheless, that becomes a reality.
Isn't that why they have all the interpretations?
That's what you have to understand what you're learning,
So that,
for sure.
so that you should understand
Yeah.
what you're reading?
Definitely. And he explains why this is. For the supreme will is identical with the very subject of the halacha wherein one thinks and speaks. I'm going to explain this first orally, and then we'll read it inside. Hashem wants us to eat matzah on Pesach, right? So what is Hashem's will? Tell me what is Hashem's will.
Eat matzah.
For you to chew the matzah. When a yid chews the matzah, is that Hashem's will? No. That's the fulfillment of His will. His will is that a yid should eat that. His will is that you should eat matzah. When you actually do it, you're fulfilling His will. Your mouth is not His will. The piece of crumbled matzah is not His will. The will is in His mind. His will is in His mind. He wants you to do this. When you do it, you fulfill His will. That's the fulfillment of His will. I need you to understand this.
Yeah.
So the action is the fulfillment.
Is the fulfillment of Hashem's will. It's not the will itself. The will itself is in Hashem's mind. Let's forget about God. Talk about yourself. I want to eat cake. That will. Where's that will? In my mind, in my brain, in my... So when I actually chew the cake, that's my will. That's the fulfillment of my will. My will is in my soul.
What is the
Whole wish
action?
fulfillment.
What?
It's whole wish fulfillment.
It's fulfillment of the wish, exactly.
That's exactly what it's called.
What?
It's the action.
The action is only the fulfillment of the will. It's not the will itself. The black box is not God's will. God's will is that you should put on that black box on your arm. When you do it, you fulfill His will, but the will is in His man, is in His mind. That's where He wants it.
Actually, the will is in His Torah, in the Torah.
In the Torah, which is His mind, will, and wisdom.
So when
It's just like by a human being. When you want something, I want to go to the store. So that's, even before I went to the store, I had that will, and that's my will. When I go, I'm fulfilling my will. That's not my will, that's the fulfillment of the will.
And
same thing with mitzvahs, yeah?
And so the will of the Jew that's ready to do the mitzvah, so that will and God's will are...
No. What I'm saying is, by Torah it's very different. What is Torah? Let's take a halacha in Torah. The halacha in Torah is that if, for example, me and him have an argument about $100, and we go to the court case, to the rabbinical court, and they rule based on certain rules in Torah, Torah law, that he's now the one that's going to get the $100, I'm going to have to pay him. That's God's wisdom. That's part of the Torah law, yeah? So the law is when the rabbi tells me, give him $100, and I gave him the $100. That's the will. That's the wisdom of Hashem. No, the wisdom is the halacha. When you learn that halacha, what's in your mind?
God's wisdom.
God's wisdom, and God's wisdom is Him. So in your mind now is not the fulfillment of His wisdom. In your mind is a piece of His wisdom. His wisdom now is ingested, incorporated, absorbed in your brain. So you have a piece of God in your brain. Because Him and His will and His wisdom are all one. When you're doing a mitzvah, you're fulfilling His will. When you're learning Torah, you're actually absorbing His will and wisdom in your brain. The very wisdom that you're understanding in your mind, that is His. That's His wisdom. It's not the fulfillment of His wisdom. We're not talking about the action of the mitzvah, the action of the law. We're talking about the intellect of the law. The law itself. The law itself we're absorbing in our mind. That is God's will. That is God's wisdom. So now that wisdom is now incorporated in your brain. Your brain now has incorporated, absorbed a piece of Hashem's wisdom, which means you absorbed a piece of Hashem. So your brain now thinks, and then the brain is very different than any other things. Your brain now is even changed by this knowledge. It's not the same brain before you understood this knowledge and after you understood this knowledge.
We don't necessarily have to understand it to absorb His wisdom. In other words, we can not stretch something on the Sabbath, but that doesn't necessarily mean we understand it.
That's a fulfillment. That's the fulfillment of the law.
Yeah, but I know what that wisdom is. I know that God says don't schlep anything on the Sabbath.
So if you're contemplating that law...
Forget me schlepping, but I'm just saying just the fact that I know this.
Okay, that's...
I have His wisdom,
in your mind,
but I don't
exactly.
necessarily understand it.
Right. No, but you understand what He wants.
Yeah,
You know
so I
what He
understand
wants. That is the wisdom that you know. In other words, your mind has absorbed, has taken in a piece of Hashem's wisdom. That what's in your mind is not the fulfillment of His wisdom. That's the wisdom itself. So for example, we'll leave God out of this for a moment. We'll talk about us. If I say, I want you now to go to the door and open it up, and you actually go and you open it up, so you fulfilled my will. Right? Action is the fulfillment of the will. But what happens if I explain to you something, an intellectual idea that I came up with, and I teach it to you, and you understand it fully? So now a part of my wisdom is now in your brain. So is a part of me in your brain?
Yes.
No, because me and my wisdom are not one and the same. I am me, and then this part of my wisdom. You took a part of my wisdom, not me.
Okay, right.
My wisdom and me are two different things. But by Hashem, His will and His wisdom and Him are all one. So if you understand His wisdom, you have Him in your brain. When you have my philosophy in your brain, you don't have me. You have my idea. My idea and me of two very different people, two very different things, entities.
But just by recognizing Him, we have.
But God and His ideas are one and the same. He and His wisdom are one. So when you have His wisdom, you have Him. That's the power, and that's the power of Torah.
Just by thinking about Him, then we have
thinking
Him.
about thinking about Him, thinking about His wisdom, thinking about His Torah. That means you're one with Him itself. There's a part of Him in you now. You became one. Your brain and Him is one. It's not two entities. They became one entity. Your brain. What is your brain? I'm not talking about the physical brain. I'm talking about your intellect.
But I'm always one with Him.
How are you always one with Him? When you're thinking about...
God is one. Everything is God. God is everything. I'm one with God.
But there's no concealment. That's true to a certain extent. But here we take away the concealment.
To me, for example, I meditate. I meditate because I try to put my mind in blank and try to think.
But that's not Jewish meditation, by the way, putting our mind at blank.
It isn't?
No, it's not the way we meditate.
But when I do, I just think about Him.
Then you're not blank.
No, what I mean to say is not. I don't. There is a method.
There is a method of meditation.
I'm not thinking about. Oh, I have to go to.
No. The point.
The doctor. I
meditation in Judaism is when you fix your mind on a specific topic. Hopefully Judaism, a godly topic, and you fix your mind on that and only that for 5 minutes, for 2 minutes, for 10 minutes, for something. And you meditate on it. There's other meditations that say blank out, get everything out of your mind, just focus on a point. That's not the way we meditate. That's whatever it is, but it's not...
remember when you were teaching us the different skies, the different...
levels,
world. When I do, I try to think about that.
Okay, good. That's a positive meditation. That means you're fixed on a specific topic. I wouldn't call that blanking out all thoughts. That's not called blanking out all thoughts. That's focusing on one thought.
Okay.
That's good. That's the way we should meditate. But there are others that sit there with a crisscross, what do they call their feet like that?
Yoga.
And they sit and block everything out. And they think about a black point, and that's what they think about, the black point. That's it.
There is
such a meditation. There is such an exercise.
Is it possible to actually put your mind in blank? I don't know.
I don't know if that's yoga. I don't know if that's yoga.
True. You really should focus on one thing.
But they don't. They tell you not to.
It's called legs crossed.
So meditation is focus on a point.
There's a lot
on a black point.
What's
the point of that?
I don't. It should.
It's
it
not
was-
important. I don't want to get
calm
into that.
yourself.
That tell you to
I don't think it.
It's like zone out, calm yourself
Is
down.
it possible?
So that's what he's saying.
Calm.
As for the thought and meditation in the words of the Torah that are in the brain, and the power of speech engaged in the words of Torah that are in the mouth, these being the innermost garments of the divine soul, not to mention the divine soul itself which is clothed in them, all of them are completely merged in perfect unity with the Supreme Will, and are not merely a vehicle. For the Supreme Will is identical with the very subject of the halacha wherein the one thinks and speaks, inasmuch as all the laws are particular streams flowing from the inner Supreme Will itself, since His blessed will willed it that a particular act be permissible or a food ritually fit or for consumption, or this person inculpable and that entirely innocent, or the reverse. That's particular halachas. If you're thinking about that, so you're now one with Hashem. So also that's Hashem Himself. So are the letter combinations of the Pentateuch, prophets and hagiographer. That's the three sections of the Torah, the Tanakh. And those letter combinations are a promulgation of His will and wisdom, which are united with the blessed Ein Sof in perfect unity. Here He's, I think, answering your point that even if you're reading the Torah and you don't exactly understand everything, but those combinations of letters already, that is Hashem's will and His wisdom. They are a promulgation of His will and wisdom, which are united with the blessed Ein Sof in perfect unity. Since, and here's the key, He and is the knower and the knowledge and so forth. We learned earlier the quote from the Rambam in chapter 2, we learned this, and another in chapter 4, the Alter Rebbe quoted the Maimonides, who writes that Hashem, human beings, are a composite. We have, it is me, my power of knowledge, and the subject that I know. For example, if I know that this table is cherry color, so there's me. There is the faculty of my knowledge, because I have many faculties. I'm made up of many other power to see, the power to write, have the power to hear, and have a power to know. So when I employ my power of knowledge to know that this table is red, that's a combination of a coming together of three entities. Me, my power of knowledge, and the table. The subject known, which is the table. When Hashem knows that the table is red, which He does, of course, the Rambam says His knowledge is not ours, this is not the same as ours. Because He and His power of knowledge and the subject that known, which is the table, are all one. So when you say that, that means He and His wisdom are also all one. So when Hashem knows that tefillin have to be black, and they have to be, the candles have to be lit at 6:14 tonight, tomorrow night, or Friday night, or 7:14, that's Him. It's not He knows this, that's His knowledge, that's His will. He and His will are all one. Me and my will are not all one. That's why when you incorporate my will into my wisdom into your brain, you're not incorporating me. But by Hashem, you're incorporating Him Himself. He and His wisdom are all one. He's not a composite of many things. He and His knowledge are one. He and His wisdom and His will are all one. So when you now absorb His will and wisdom into your brain via the knowledge of Torah, you incorporated Him Himself into your brain.
And that changes your brain.
That changes your brain. You become literally one with Him. I'll tell you what it means it changes your brain. Intellect influences the way we think. I'll give you an example. What is a soul, if not intellect and emotions? We learned that in chapter 3. What is the entity soul? We're talking about the human soul or the godly soul. It's made up of 10 faculties, which are divided into 2. 3 intellectual faculties and 7 emotional faculties. Our soul is basically intellect and emotions. Yeah? So now when our soul knows, our soul thinks in a certain way. Say you're brought up in a home where your father and mother taught you to be a very, very conservative person or a very, very liberal person. So your mind thinks like a conservative or like a liberal. And now everything that you see and hear in life, you're going to process through that intellect of your brain, which is more disposed to, you think in a certain way. Let's say you grew up as a conservative. But then you went away to college, spent 4 years in college, speaking to professors and to other people. And they pounded and told you every day in and out that what your father told you is wrong and it's not the way you see it, and that not everyone is all, they change the way you think. It takes a long time to change the way a person thinks. But it could happen. And vice versa also. A person that's born in a home that's very liberal could become just the opposite. He goes to an environment that's very conservative, and they can work on him a few years and he becomes a conservative. So that's what I mean. When you absorb knowledge, your brain changes because of it. So let's apply that to God now. The people in this room, if I met you 10 years ago, you thought in one way. Today you think different. What made you think different? Because you learned Torah. The Torah changed the way you think. You don't think about money the same way. You don't think about family the same way. Well, why not? What happened? You absorb God's wisdom, and that stayed with you. When you put on film, you finish putting on film, you roll it off, and you go back to your business. It doesn't stay with you. Certainly it does have an effect on your hand. There's no doubt that the holiness has an effect, but it doesn't stay with you on a conscious level. But when you learn Torah, that's it. It's in, it doesn't go out. As long as your memory is working. It doesn't go out. And the more you learn, the more that starts seeping in and beginning to change the way you think. So your mind becomes a godly mind. It thinks like God thinks. And which means you became one with Hashem. The Torah makes you one with Hashem. This could be true with not only God's wisdom. Like I gave an example, liberalism, conservatism, and things like that. But with God it's different, because He and His wisdom are all one. So your brain becomes one with Hashem, not just for the moment you learn, but forever, because that knowledge stays there and begins to change the way you think. So your mind becomes a godly mind. So you're one with Hashem now. Your mind becomes one with Hashem. Now clearly, if you start thinking about unholy things, so right then and there, you're not godly. You're not one with Hashem. For that, when you're thinking. But with learning and with Torah, it's very different than with the performance of mitzvahs.
Now, with the soul, okay, it's a godly soul that God places in a human body.
Yeah.
But that godly soul, doesn't it know all these things, and it's just the level of revelation that is actually being opened to the soul? So when you're learning, okay, because it sounds like what you're saying is that the soul is actually learning, whereas before the soul did not.
Why did I say before it did not?
Well, because if you learn something that...
Yeah, but the learning of the soul we're talking about the conscious mind. We're not talking about that spiritually up there in heaven when it was in God's domain. We're talking about now as it's in your body and it's employing your brain to learn. And your intellect. Your intellect is fresh when it starts, when it's born. It doesn't know anything. So it's taught all kinds of things. And it's influenced by what it's taught. It begins to process things perceive things the way it's taught. People perceive things very differently based on environment, based on environmental realities, based on education, their upbringing. I perceive things very different than all of you, perhaps. But that can change. The more you learn, the more it changes. The more you learn about anything. With God it's unique, because when you're learning about His wisdom, you got Him He comes a package. He is His wisdom. I am not my wisdom. Einstein is buried. He's not in my mind. His idea is in my mind. When you talk about God, it's not that God is somewhere else, and His idea infiltrated my mind. He infiltrated my mind. In a good way. So He's in my mind. My mind is one with Him. What was your question?
My question was, we're studying,
71.
is, when I study Torah or whatever, that we come and we study, you translate, you explain, that's one way of being with Him. How about when I pray because I know it by heart, but I don't understand what I'm saying exactly? Is that another way?
Prayer is not
or
the same as Torah.
or reading it.
Reading
you say
what?
I read it because you say that the words have certain combinations that are powerful. Is it okay if I read it? Is it,
You
or
read the
do I
Torah.
need to understand what I'm reading?
It's better to understand, without a doubt. It's better to understand. When
But
you're learning Torah,
is it powerful also once I say it, even though if I don't understand
words
it, or
of
I need
Torah?
to understand it? Yeah, just say.
the words of Torah, yes, powerful. In other words, I said before, the written Torah, the 5 books of Moses, you could read, and if you don't understand it, you get the credit of learning Torah. But if you read a piece of Talmud or anything else, and you didn't understand it, you didn't get the credit of learning Torah. No.
I think she's talking about prayer specifically.
Prayer is a different thing. Prayer is a mitzvah like any other mitzvah.
But she's saying that if she
That's not Torah.
recites a prayer, I know, but if I'm getting you right, you recite a prayer, you know it by heart, but you don't know what the prayer actually means.
So that's a very important thing. You should pray anyway, yes. But that's not what... and a separate thing, yeah. Yeah, definitely.
I could tell you that I've done it both ways. I mean...
So I wonder if it was
The answer is
creditable.
that you should daven, and even if you don't understand what you're saying, your neshama understands.
Absolutely understand.
I mean, I guess my soul understands.
That's right. Okay. This then is the meaning of the above-mentioned quotation that the Torah and the Holy One, blessed be He, are altogether one, and not merely organs of the King, as are the commandments. Because the commandments are the fulfillment of His will. The Torah is His will itself. Now, since at such time a person occupies himself with the words of the Torah, because I want to make a distinction, I want to explain one more point. The mitzvah, when you're learning it, the mitzvah before you fulfill it is Torah. What is a mitzvah? If I'm talking to you now, on Shabbos afternoon, Friday afternoon, you have to learn light Shabbos candles. That's a mitzvah. That we just engaged in Torah, or we engaged in a mitzvah?
The Torah.
That's the Torah.
Right.
Before you actually do it, it's Torah.
But
when you do it, it's the fulfillment. It's
the
before you do it, that's His will. When you do it, you fulfilled His will. So as long as you're talking about it and learning about it, that's Torah. When you fulfill it, that's a mitzvah. Now, to be sure, there's parts of the Torah that are... There's a lot of areas of Torah that discuss things that are not particularly a mitzvah. Ideas, unity of God, oneness of God. Those are all important ideas that we... Torah is not only mitzvahs. It's called the will and wisdom of Hashem. There's a section of Torah that's the will of Hashem. There's a section of Torah that's the wisdom of Hashem. That's the fulfillment of His will, which is the action and performance of mitzvahs. So what he's saying now is like this. Now, since at such time as a person occupies himself with the words of the Torah, the supreme will, united as it is in perfect unity with the blessed Ein Sof, right, as we just said, is completely manifest and in no way obscured in the divine soul and its innermost garments. In other words, its thought and speech, those are the innermost garments. So when you're learning Torah, Hashem is now completely revealed, completely manifest and not obscured at all in the divine soul and the inner garment, which is the thought and speech. It follows that the soul and its garments are also at such time veritably united with the blessed Ein Sof in perfect unity, like the union of the speech and thought of the Holy One, blessed be He, with His essence and being, as mentioned above.
Why is it...
One second, I want to explain this. Hashem's will and His wisdom, meaning the Torah, we said is in completely one. That's Hashem Himself. When you're learning Torah, now when that will and wisdom is being learned by a Jew, that means the soul of this Jew is now engaged in learning that wisdom. And his innermost faculties, his brain and his thought and his speech are engaged in this study. So just like the Torah is one with Hashem, and the Torah is obviously the Torah is Hashem Himself. So when that wisdom, that Torah is now in your mind and in your speech, and so your soul and your intellect and your speech are also one with Hashem, and there's no obscurity at all. Just like we said before in chapter 21, if you remember, we talked about God's speech. Right? What is God's speech? God said, "Let there be light." So we talked about in chapter 21 that the world is united with Hashem in a perfect unity, right? That upside is bottled. It's totally nullified in Hashem's existence. Why? Because what's the whole world? Hashem's speech. He spoke the world into existence. What's one word compared to the speaker speaking it? His power of speech, which is endless. He can speak who knows how many words. Imagine, and we went through this whole process in chapter 20 and 21, talking about the speech of Hashem, the speech of a human being, how one word is completely bottled to his soul, where the speech comes from. So Hashem Himself, when He speaks, is of course the whole world, which is His speech, is completely nullified in His existence. And from Hashem's perspective, the speech and Hashem is one. Right? It's not two separate entities. Like by us, we speak, it speaks out. It's a separate entity. It's an external exercise. By Hashem, it's all one. There's no place separate outside of Him. So it's Hashem. So the speech is the way it is. The letters of God's speech is, but like by us, the letters of thought, and that they're still absorbed within our mind. Right? What distinguishes our thought from our speech? What's the difference between our letters of thought and our letters of speech? Our words of thought and words when we think in language. Yeah, I'm thinking that this is white. This page is white. So there are 4 words in my thought. This page is white. Right? So those are letters of thought before I speak them. What's the difference when I say those words?
It's external.
Now it went away from me. I can't take it back. It left my mouth. Could something ever leave Hashem's mouth?
No.
There's nothing outside of Him, so nothing ever leaves Him. So by Him, words of thought, speech are like by us words of thought, as they're still absorbed in our reality, and they're one with our mind, and one with our brain, and one with our soul. So just like that's real and true by Hashem. So a Yid, when he learns Torah, as I said before, he's absorbing Hashem's wisdom in his mind. He becomes one with Hashem just like God's speech is one with Him.
Heavy concept.
Because as I said, your mind is absorbing Hashem Himself, and there's no obscurity. In the world that we live outside of the world of Torah, it's just this table. Before we make it part of Hashem's reality, or the tree outside, on Indian trays. It's living off God's speech. But the speech is obscured from the tree. We don't see it. There's a concealment that makes it look like an independent tree. Not part of Hashem's oneness and unity. But where the obscurity is no longer there, where the obscurity is not present anymore, so it's one with Hashem. When a Yid learns Torah, his brain becomes one with Hashem. There's no obscurity. Hashem is present in his brain. In a revealed manner, he's learning Torah. He's conscious of it. So that becomes one with Hashem, just like God's speech is one with Hashem. You follow or not? Let's read this again. Now, since at such time as a person occupies himself with the words of the Torah and the Supreme Will, united as it is in perfect unity with the Blessed Ein Sof, is completely manifest and in no way obscured in the divine soul and its innermost garments, thought and speech, it follows that the soul and its garments are also at such time veritably united with the Blessed Ein Sof in perfect unity, like the union of the speech and thought of the Holy One, blessed be He, with His essence of being, as mentioned above. For there is no separate thing except through concealment of the countenance, as explained there. So there's no separateness. When is this separateness? When this God conceals Himself. So the whole world looks independent, separate from God. But when that concealment is removed, in the case of a Yid learning Torah and absorbing Hashem in his mind, where it's revealed godliness in his mind now, he becomes one with Hashem for real. Moreover, their union is even of a higher and profounder order than the union of the Blessed Ein Sof with the upper worlds. Hashem and Atzilus is not as united as Hashem and a Yid when he learns Torah.
It's Hashem and Atzilus.
And Hashem and his supreme world of Atzilus is not as united in one as a Yid when he learns Torah.
Really?
Yeah. That's what he's saying. Now, moreover, their union is even of a higher and profounder order than the union of the Blessed Ein Sof, that's a reference to Hashem, with the upper world. Why? Since the Supreme Will is actually manifest in the soul and His garments when they are engaged in the Torah, because it is identical with the Torah, Hashem is one with the Torah, while the supernal worlds receive their vitality from the light and life that are derived from the Torah, which is His will and wisdom, as it is written. In the wisdom Thou hast made them all. What he's saying over here is like this. This is some profound stuff. Remember the beginning of the chapter we read that there's something called the inner will and the outer will in every person, yeah? I always give the example of a business. You open up a business, you buy a fax machine, you buy a computer, you have a secretary, and you have tables and desks and chairs and everything. So you have an office, a functioning office. The functioning office is what you really want. Yes. If you ask the boss, do you want this office to function? Absolutely. He really wants it. He invests money to make sure it happens. But that's the outer will, it's the external will. His real will is the buck. It's the money he makes out of this business. The minute you take away that inner will, the accountant tells him this business is bankrupt, there's no money to be made here, all of it shuts down in a day. It tells you, lays off the secretary, sells the fax machine, he gets rid of everything. Because that's not his real will. His inner will is money. Right? So the whole reason the boss is investing and buying machinery and buying all that and investing in an office is because the inner will is vitalizing everything. If the profit at the end of the week is what gives the whole week vitality. Right? That's why he wakes up and comes to that office. That's why he invests in that office. The money at the end of the week becomes the vitality of the whole office. They live off the profit. In other words, without profit they're gone. With profit they live. So they live because the profit becomes the source of life for this office. You take that away, it's gone. The whole office is over. The same is with Hashem and His Word. He created this vast universe. Why did He create it? That's His will. He wanted a universe. Yeah. Of course He wanted it. Otherwise He wouldn't do it. But that's His outer will. What's His inner will? What's the profit? The Torah mitzvahs. A Yid should fulfill Torah mitzvahs. That's the profit. That's what he really wants. In order for a Yid to make money, you need a fax machine. In order for a Yid to do a mitzvah, you need a world. So what's the inner world and what's the outer world? And not only do you need a world, but how do you get a world? From the infinite God, doesn't come a limited, finite world as we have. You have to have Atzilus first, and you have to have Bria, and all the different myriads of levels, all the way till down to this world. So you have the Atzilus is the fax machine, and Bria is the desk, and It's all a major functioning reality because at the end is a prophet. What's the prophet? His tefillin. Take away his tefillin, the whole thing is over. So the whole Atzilus lives off what? What's the vitality of Atzilus? Torah mitzvahs. When a Yid does Torah mitzvahs, Atzilus lives. And if a Yid stops doing Torah mitzvahs, Atzilus is over. The whole process is over. That's what he's saying now. Look what he says here. Moreover, let's read that again. Their
So that's
union.
what happens on Rosh Hashanah.
Yes, on Rosh Hashanah, this is all coming into play in a real way. God has to decide if this is all working. But it's true every minute. It's true every day also.
So if we stop, God forbid.
If we don't blow the shofar, no Jew in the whole world blows the shofar,
That's it.
the world is over. It's finished.
Really?
Yeah. It really.
What
What is he? He doesn't. What is he? What's the world? If not, the world is here. If it's like a business. If there's no money, the whole project
So
is
then there
over.
was
So the
never,
prophet is mitzvah.
That's the
Never.
inner will is the mitzvah. The outer will is the whole universe and all the upper
We're
world.
just here to do mitzvah.
That's what the world is here for.
there was
That's
never
what we're
a
here
time when
for.
someone didn't blow a shofar.
It was never
Never.
happened.
So we're here
Never
to just do
happened.
mitzvah.
Right?
We're only here. Not only you're here to do a mitzvah. That is great. That's a given.
Yeah, I guess so.
But the cow in Montana is also here only so that you should do a
Are you
mitzvah.
kidding? Try and get
The
five
whole world, the
people from
trees out there,
family
everything
together on
is
the same night.
a world where you can do
So
mitzvahs.
did Adam blow a shofar?
Yeah.
No, we're talking about since Matan Torah. Adam bowed to God on that first Rosh Hashanah. Yeah, Adam accepted God's sovereignty. That first Rosh Hashanah and ever since. But mainly it says that the first 2,500 years God gave the world a free lunch.
The first what?
2,500 years. Till the Torah was given. Once the Torah was given, he said, now the free lunch is over. Now you're either going to earn it and deserve it. If not, I mean, in other words, till 2,500 years, you said, I won't make money, I won't make money.
Mhm.
You know, some people, it's like, you know, you have people that like to buy a sports team. None of them make money. And then there's no money. No one's making money on those teams. They all lose money.
It's
But it's a
true.
hobby.
Right.
You got to own the team, right? If you have a few dollars, you got to own the team. For the first 2,500 years, God needed a business. He had a business. It made money, didn't make money. It was a business. He was happy with it. It's like owning a team. And once the Torah was given, God got, he sold the team, and he said, now there's no money in it. I'm not, this project's over.
So what you're saying, the world of 6 billion people are relying upon 14 million people
Absolutely.
Yeah.
to keep this
It
world
says
going.
that clearly in the Medrash.
Right.
Bereshis,
Well, that's
in
what-
the beginning, God created heaven
Right.
and earth. So it doesn't say betchila, which is the right Hebrew word for it. It should have said betchila, in the beginning. Bereshis is a funny word for the beginning. So the Medrash says Bereshis is made up of two words, Beis, Reshis, which is the two. Beis is number 2. Aleph is 1 and Beis is 2. For two things that are called Reshis, did God create heaven and earth. The whole creating of heaven and earth was because of the two things that are called Reshis. What's Reshis? The first. What two things are called first? Torah and Jews. The whole heaven and earth and everything in between, and even the upper world, were created for Jews and Torah. Don't tell them.
It's too late.
They wouldn't listen to me anyway.
They will.
Well, the non-Jews wouldn't listen.
Say it with determination, they would.
But there are
I do at
there's
work.
non-Jews that really believe that.
There are Jews, non-Jews
No,
that believe.
non-Jews.
Sure there are.
Absolutely.
They know that the Jewish people
No.
are the least of
Yeah.
the world. Yeah.
And then the Jewish
That's the
people what?
business. That's the profit.
Right.
So Atzilus
That
is
without
nothing.
the Jewish people, nobody would be here.
So look what he says. Moreover, their union, the union of a Yid when he learns Torah with Hashem, is even of a higher and profounder order than the union of the blessed Ein Sof with the upper worlds, since the supreme will is actually manifest in the soul and his garments when they are engaged in the Torah, because it is identical with Torah, while all the supernal worlds receive their vitality from the light and life that are derived from the Torah, which is his will and wisdom. As it is written, in wisdom thou hast made them all. The whole world came from Techachma, from wisdom. In other words, thus, his wisdom, which is the Torah, is above them all and it is identical with his blessed will, which is described as encompassing all worlds. I think I'm going to leave this. We'll start over here next week for more over again. But keep that
It's
in mind.
awful a lot.